Sacramento Poetry Day was named in honor of the publication of a collection of Sacramento poets, the first major collection of Sacramento poets that was published by the Sacramento Poetry Center in 1985. And the following year, Mayor Anne Rudin, then mayor, named the day Sacramento Poetry Day in honor of the publication of Landing Signals and to recognize the work that the Poetry Center was doing in the literary community in Sacramento. The project was the brainchild of Barry Kennedy, B.L. Kennedy, who was a lot of things in the community, including a real mover and shaker. He had great ideas, and he was kind of considered for a while the bad boy of Sacramento poetry. But when he talked to me about the idea of doing this anthology, both in written form in a book and with recordings, the high tech of the day being quarter-inch tape cassette, it sounded like a great idea. So I took it to the board. I was on the board at the time, and people got excited about the idea and got very enthusiastic about supporting it and doing fundraising for it, which took more than a year to put together the money. So it probably started around maybe the end of 1984 that we really got this rolling, and chose some editors for the book, which were Annie Minna-Broker, Kevin Dobbs, and Doug Blazak was the third editor of the written collection. And Barry and myself were the editors for the audio collection, which we did up in the studio of Paul Emery up in Nevada City. Anyway, it was a heck of a project that took a while to get together. There's a lot of poets in it, and some are in both the book and the audio portion. Some are only on one or the other, depending on where, we decided that the strongest representation would be. Anyway, it came out. People were very excited to see it. We sold a lot of copies of it and had a couple of big release parties, most notably at the On Broadway, which is an old jazz club. It's not there anymore. It was a lot of fun and significant. I don't want to just make it sound like we were just having a good time. It was the first collection of Sacramento poets and actually reached back a little bit into the history of Sacramento writers and included Raymond Carver and Brother Antoninus and people like that who were not necessarily currently in Sacramento, but Sacramento had been a very big part of their life as writers. I had a good friend, Carol Finley, who was one of those people who works in either the state or city government that we just said they run the government. And she went to Anne and showed her what we had done and accomplished. Anne had been a big supporter of the Sacramento Poetry Center anyway. And so she wrote a beautiful proclamation acknowledging the publication of this thing and what a significant thing it was. And as I said, acknowledging the work that the Poetry Center was doing in the community at the time. The day was celebrated regularly for a few years, and then interest kind of waned, and I'd have to go remind the Poetry Center once in a while that this thing existed and it should be celebrated, and sometimes it would be and sometimes it wouldn't be. I think it should always be waved as a flag, not just because it was the first, but because it's an opportunity. And I know you feel this, Andrew, and I know Viola does as well, but you're new and excited about it, that it is a moment that we can grab and say, let's do something. Not many cities in the country have a poetry day. So that's a big deal to me, and one that is named forever by the city as a place to acknowledge and celebrate. That's the nickel version.
Welcome, y'all. I've got Patrick Grizzell in the studio space with me today. The current, you're like the Sacramento poetry historian, is what I've found out. And I also have another very, very special guest. I know her as Grandmother Poetry. You may know her as Viola Spencer, who is the very first poet laureate in Sacramento history, one of two. Dennis Schmitz, who is no longer with us, was one half as well alongside her. And I just, number one, I think this is really cool because this is the first time that we've actually met and been out of the Facebook chat. So it's really nice to be able to sit with you, Grandma. And I wanted to ask this question as I bring both of you on. Why is Poetry Day important, number one? And is it more or less important than it was when it was established?
Oh, I think it's more important. More important for lots of reasons. But it's one of those things. It's like a muscle that's not used regularly, and it gets a little wobbly, and you don't really remember the reasons you use it. But poetry has become such an important part of our lives now, especially the last 20 years, I think. And so many people realize that poetry is a lot of different things, a lot of lifestyles, a lot of things to say. And it's just getting bigger and bigger. And now to sort of re-enunciate, our city's Poetry Day is a wonderful thing. It's like putting an accent on poetry, the word. And I'm excited by it. I'm happy that it hasn't been forgotten.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. So for everybody who's kind of watching at home and just found out that there's a Poetry Day, you are not alone. I was copied on an email thread about Poetry Day, to which I had to kind of privately go to some people and be like, what is Poetry Day? I don't know about this yet. And it turned out that a lot of folks didn't know that there was such a day, and it is such a big thing. Patrick will tell you, I have not left him alone since finding out that there was a Poetry Day, because it's so exciting to me. So, can we just talk about, one of the things that I'm very interested in right now is healing, and what role the poets play in healing community and healing communities in the wake of this trauma that we've all been through for the last couple of years. How do you use poetry to heal?
It's an interesting question.
That's a big question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll give you my general go-to, and I said this to you recently. There's a quote from a William Carlos Williams poem where he says, I know it's difficult to get the news from poetry, but men die every day for lack of what is found there. I think that's really true and really significant, and not just a great sort of philosophical statement about the use of the art, but really spells out that there is value in poetry outside of its, literary strength, philosophical strength, bravado. Some poems are just so over the top that you can't speak after hearing them for a while. But I think, especially in the literary community, which is apparently historically kind of fractured for a lot of reasons, none of them bad, but there's genre differences, there's generational differences, there's all of that stuff. Bringing even those two together is a way of unifying that community, and if that community is unified, then it gives them a little better position to approach the general community and say, What can we do? How do we contribute to this culture in a more meaningful way? It's also kind of an American problem. You know, poets are not appreciated in America the way they are in other countries. And that, you know, it is just a unfortunate fact, but a fact nonetheless. And I think people see poets as kind of weirdos and, you know, all of that, which is true.
To be fair,
Don't hold that against us. You know what I mean? Anyway, that's kind of a broad general statement, but, you know, I think there's usefulness in it rather than just entertainment or something to ponder, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In answer specifically to the healing question, I think everyone needs to be healed who's alive in this world today. We have done so many cruel things to this planet and to each other in the name of humanity, which I find horribly ironic. And we all need to heal from that and heal from our misguided desires, I think, on Earth. I think that the pandemic has been a horrific lesson to all of us about that. People began to behave better. People began to think more because lots of us were in lockdown. And there's nothing like thinking when you're alone. I mean, you can't stir up too much trouble when you're alone. And in fact, I think that's where healing begins, is inside of each individual. And I personally work on healing all the time. I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 8 years ago. I was told I didn't have long to live. But here I am. And in the past 8 years, I have written 4 books and a memoir, which is at the editor's right now. And it was really hard to write while this was going on. And it was really just as hard to write when the pandemic was announced. And we all began to think, what's going to happen? Are we all going to die? Is this it? And I have seen so much goodness come out of this. And above and beyond, huge amount of space in the universe for poetry. And nice poetry, good poetry, vivid poetry. It's a wonderful thing that I'm not sure I expected would happen, but I'm very happy about it. And I hope there's a new poet born every day now. And I think there probably is. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we one of the phrases that I'm known for throwing around is "Welcome to the Renaissance," because I believe historically, when you look at something like a pandemic, something that follows is an artistic renaissance. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's from having to sit at home and sit with yourself. You know, I jokingly but very truthfully told people, like, I sat with myself for 18 months and you can only lie to yourself for like 2. So, you know, for me, poetry has always been kind of that mirror that I was able to hold up to myself and society as well. As, you know, me and Patrick were talking in hip hop culture, it's been used to speak ourselves into existence so much, right? Coming from a culture that doesn't have a lot monetarily, but was using these words to speak ourselves into how much we had and how big we were and how important we were and how heard we were. So I definitely, I think speaking ourselves into existence is one way, and especially right now, to speak our healed selves into existence. Do y'all use poetry for magic like that, like speaking things into existence, or have you seen the magic of that? Like, I wrote a poem one time about a woman that I had never met. I completely fictionalized this falling in love with this person. And then 3 years down the line, I met a woman who was exactly like this poem. Have you had any of those experiences?
Yes. Without giving away too many initials like Viola Spencer. Yes, it's happened. And the continuity of that, how we keep our poem just keeps writing itself.
Mm.
And to believe that it can happen makes it happen. And it's very thrilling to me. I wanted to back up just a tiny bit. I came into poetry. I wrote poetry from the time I was quite young, but I was very involved in college in the creation of the Women's Studies program at Sac State. It was quite an ordeal and went on for a long time, only to find out that I had not just, nobody called me a poet anymore. They called me a woman poet. And that took forever to get rid of. Because I thought to really be considered whole, we should just, if we were poets, we should just be poets. And yet I heard things like woman teacher, woman, construction worker, woman, everything. And at a certain point, it became irrelevant. And I was very happy about that, just to be known as a poet. And that was a kind of a healing thing for me as a writer, because I didn't want to be put in a little pigeonhole and left there.
Right. I mean, we had the same thing as far as hip hop goes. They used to call them femcs versus just being an MC. They were femcs. And I knew a couple of my girlfriends who were not about that. Don't call me a femc. I'm a rapper. I'm an MC just like you are. Can you tell us a little bit about the process for becoming one of the city's first poet laureates?
Well, the mechanics of it are pretty simple. Dennis and I, who only met through winning these fabulous awards at the same time. I was not his student. He was not mine. We were both teaching at the same time at Sac State. And slowly, we had been nominated for several awards, and we just kept winning them at the same time. We were splitting awards, and we got to be pretty good friends. By the time we were both, I read about it in the newspaper. Nobody told me we were even being considered for Poets Laureate. And so I'm really not sure exactly how it happened. I just know I woke up one day and it was in the paper. And if you believe everything you read, then I'm Poet Laureate. Anyway, and Dennis called me, and his reaction was, "Can you believe what they've done to us now?" Because it was being the first in that position, even though there were two of us. It's an awesome responsibility. And there was a lot of really highfalutin talk attached to it, like we were the literary ambassadors of the city and county, and to the point where people were teasing me about it, But Dennis and I made a promise to each other. And between the two of us, we decided we would take poetry to every school, every grade school, every junior high school, and every college in this area. And we did. 2 years we did that. At the end of the 2 years, we were originally asked to stay for another 2 years. And I think our reaction was, please, someone else do this. I was so tired, I could hardly lift my head up. I was still working full time. Dennis was partially retired. Yeah. But we were ready to just, do some writing of our own. Yeah. And the thing that was really wonderful about it for us, Dennis and I did have different interests. And so we sort of covered two different bases. He wanted to create an anthology, which we did, 100 poems, it was called. By Sacramento poets, and it turned out to be just a beautiful book. And my two ideas, I thought they were pretty big ideas, and in one case it became very big. But I had worked at NPR before, and I wanted to do poetry for morning edition, and so I would go down to the local NPR station and record a poem, and then they'd put it up on the satellite, and anybody who had an extra, however long it was, 1 minute and 1 second or something, would download it. So that was pretty thrilling. And then my other project, which Dennis also participated in, I wanted to, because I was still working, I was very interested in doing workplace readings. And that was a phenomenal success. And I did things as small as 3 or 4 people from on their lunch hour in the county building to 500 people coming over a period of 2.5 hours to the Franchise Tax Board auditorium to read their favorite poems.
Wow.
And they didn't go back to work. So that was very interesting. You know? And the person who was the head of the Franchise Tax Board at the time came and made everyone very nervous. And he actually, I turned around and looked at him because he had invited us to come. He had tears in his eyes. And I said, is it that bad? You know, what is it? And he said, I'm just so moved. These are people that, you know, are working on these horrible card machines day in and day out. That particular workplace has walkways built over the top of the workers and supervisors that walk back and forth. Are they wasting 1 minute? Wow. Are they wasting 30 seconds? You know, and it's a horrible, horrible workplace. And it's still like that. It's just, it's down 3 times as big as it used to be. But I can't tell you how many people came to me and said, thank you for making this thing happen. And by the way, what's a laureate? I said, I've never been able to answer it, you know, because it's a different kind of magic that happens in an academic setting. But for me, it was just as powerful. And that's what we did. We just went from place to place to place with our little notebooks. And it was magic, and it still is magic. I'm so happy, Andru, with what you're doing with your poet laureateship. It's astonishing. It's brought in so many new people and so many young people. There were times I go to these poetry readings and everybody had the same white hair that I have, you know, and I'd be very upset by it. I think somebody else has got to grow up, you know, become a poet in Sacramento. So when I saw what was happening with your time as Poet Laureate, I can't tell you how happy I am about it. It's wonderful.
You know, that means the world to me to be able, you know, one of the biggest things for me was I know the history of poetry in this city, and that there are some amazing, when I came to this city, it was like, there's a poetry center. There's a center just for poetry here. Like, that is amazing. And I've never stopped being impressed with the legacy of poetry here. We're talking about poets like Jose Montoya. You both know the affinity and the place in my heart that Jose holds. And being able to connect the older generation of poets with the younger generation of poets, because I do believe we all have so much to learn. When I look at poets like Patrick and Viola, these are the poets with the mastery of words that is only earned over time and ruined paper. Like,
and ruined reputations.
Yeah, ruined relationships, everything.
They're all ruins.
So
Yeah.
You know, and the kids, when you think about like a Sacramento area Youth Speaks or some of these younger people out here, just the passion that they bring to writing. That's why I stay with all these young kids around me, because I need that. I need y'all to give me that boost, that battery charge. And I heard you talk about it a little bit, but I want to ask both of you, as we come into this Poetry Day and a day that we're celebrating poetry, what is the power of poetry?
Well, that's the workshop question of the decades, man.
Ain't it?
Yeah. I think the power of it, we're kind of looking at it right now. I think it's a way to enliven the community, to help create and share ways of, you know, people being able to engage in a higher level of communication. I mean, you can do with the poem a lot more than you can do with shouting across a table. If the poem is good, obviously. It's a different way of communicating, and you know, sometimes it's really accessible, sometimes it's really not. Kind of goes back to that genre thing. I mean, some of my favorite poems, I still don't understand. I don't have any idea what the poet's saying, you know. But I work towards that. But I think it's that there's that transformative thing in poetry. That to me, when I'm writing, that's what I'm looking for in the poem, and I think that's what happens also once it leaves you. It's like if I'm in a poem that is not coming to some point of transformation, I almost abandon it, because it's like I'm just telling you about my lunch. You know, not that interesting in itself. Although sometimes lunch is interesting too. But you know, that transformative aspect of it is, I think, what leaves us into the community. And we don't necessarily have much control at that point, but we should be. I don't like to say should when it comes to poetry. I don't think there's any particular rules about what you do and how you do it or any of that stuff. Poets do what they do individually, and that's kind of the way it is. But it's nice when there is something that goes, you know, from your place of thought and seeking transformation, which I think also goes back to the seeking healing. I mean, a lot of times the poems, I don't say that I write poems about healing, but sometimes I do write about things that are troubling. And I feel better about those things having expressed the best way I can. That's another tool that you can give to students, younger people, new writers, throw into workshops and conferences and that sort of thing. It is a tool that allows people to approach a point of self-transformation, whatever that may be. However big it is, however small it is, the transformation is the thing that matters. I think really now just expressing it, that's the thing that matters the most to me in a poem. Whether it's a deep poem, philosophical poem about gardening, whatever it is, there is a transformation. You know it when you see it in your poem. You know, if you've been writing a long time, you recognize it, you wait for it, it comes or it doesn't come, but you know that's the thing, that place of transformation. It can be applied to lives outside of us as individuals, or even us as a group, the group being poets and writers and other artists for that matter. My spin on it.
Well, you quoted earlier William Carlos Williams. And I actually took the last workshop he ever gave at UC Davis. I was a twerp of about 17, I think. And I didn't know it was going to be a class of 700 people. And at that time, UC Davis was a dinky little school, tiny school. I wanted to go to UC Berkeley, but my parents said, no, this is the right size for you. And you'll learn a lot about animal husbandry. You know, it's like, no. And so I took this poetry class, and initially I entered college as an art history major. I wanted to be an art historian. And I took this class, and we all had these very simple assignments, and we would turn them in, and he'd have 700 poems to read overnight. And we were all positioned in little classrooms with a black and white TV hanging from the ceiling. And then one day he called my name and said, would you please meet me in my office after class? And I thought, I must be really bad. I must be so terrible. Oh my God, he even said my name. And so I went to see him, and he had stacks and stacks and stacks of really bad poems. On top of the stack was my little poem, which I think only had 5 or 6 lines. And he had written on it, of all these, she may be one. And I thought, no, it can't be. Did I find my place in the world? And I had.
Wow.
And that's all it takes. That's all it takes, I think, is a tiny bit of encouragement. Somebody else's perspective on you, what you think might be really awful or really great. And I've written plenty of poems I thought were really great, and they were actually pretty awful, you know. But you don't know until you share those things and put them in the magic of the universe, really. And I like that. When I'm writing, I wait for that exciting moment of all these she may be one to happen to me again.
Mm.
And I try to give that especially to young poets,
Yeah.
because that's just what they're waiting for.
Oh, it's so crucial that, like, how life-changing that can be. You know, I was 20 years old. I don't think I was even old enough to get into the bar yet, when I got to open the Pacifica Poetry Festival for Jack Hirschman. And Jack Hirschman, after the, you know, I was going through it at the time, so I just beelined out of the building, and he came and found me and kind of moved everyone out of the way to come and find me. And what I loved about Jack was he was like, this one was good, this one was good. I don't know what you were doing over here with this. This seemed really sticky, but like, these were really good. And he said, you have the makings of a revolutionary poet.
Oh, what a compliment.
From that moment, it was like, oh, then I know what I am now.
Yeah.
So
high praise from Jack, you know.
Oh, it was.
Not just a good poet, revolutionary poet.
Yeah. And knowing his work, like, yeah, rest in peace, Jack.
Yeah.
So as we're starting out, we're gonna attract some people who are like, poetry is just roses are red, violets are blue. I'm kind of bored, and so are you, right? What poets? Who are the poets that you read that excite you? Who are, or even if you're just coming into poetry, I say you're just scrolling, you find out, oh, it is poetry day. I've never really been into poetry. Who's a good introduction?
Boy, that's tough. It, you know, if the new audience is young, it's one set of people maybe. If they're more mature, there's another set of people. If they've done some higher education, you might go here. If they're in high school, it might go here. It's hard. I mean, you can give people a list of people that you like, and some of it may stick to the wall for them, and you know, most of it will probably fall right off. I'm big on suggesting anthologies, you know, collections of work, because then you're going to see a lot of different stuff. So you're not going to just see one poet's work that kind of feels the same maybe throughout and not get anything from it. I mean, coming up with the list is a good idea. I tend to not do that. I can list some of my favorites, which includes, like, you know, Jack Hirschman, Viola Spencer, she's all right too, you know. Dennis Schmitz, you know, still now, even though gone, is still a great teacher. His poems are, well, not always truly accessible, but usually accessible. They're usually very specific. He writes in a useful way. He explains things in his poems, like how to do things, how to see things. A lot of stuff about family and life and just personal generosity, spirituality, that sort of stuff. You know, Mary Oliver comes to mind when I say that, because she's also in that world of open spiritual or spirituality and seeing the world in a different way. What are you going to do with your one beautiful life? That's her question. And, you know, the answer may or may not be in poems, but my money's on the poem to help you get there. You know, it can help
and
contribute.
I've been very inspired by people like Patti Smith, she's a heck of a writer, but beyond that, everything she recites is a song, whether she wants it to be or not.
Right.
And I find she's very accessible. Lots of people who I knew who hated poetry, thought it was boring, picked up one of her books and just thought, holy cow, this is it. And it is it, you know. And I worked with a band for a long time. Patrick has a band. And I like the kind of the marriage of music and words. It's sometimes you're caught by poetry and you don't even know what it is, because music is dressing it and helping it to enunciate. but I don't know, I mean, I grew up in the town that in Oregon that Shakespeare made. I grew up in Ashland, Oregon, where poetry was something. It was important. And I remember going to some beatnik poetry readings long before I should have as a child. There was a place called the Mill on the Floss, and it was under a flour mill. There was a big water wheel, and there was a stream that ran right through the middle of this coffee house. And I saw some pretty incredible poets there as a very, very young person. And that's what excited me, is hearing the liveliness of poetry, I'm not dead yet of poetry. And I think it's really important to see poetry performed. And if you can't see it performed, then hear it with music, because it's significant that way.
I love that you said that, because there's always the certain class that's like, well, there's music that makes it songs. It's not poetry at that point. Where, I've always, I was talking to someone this morning about how hard it is for me to even separate the two. Like, I start writing a poem, and it'll have this natural flow to it that comes from that. That's the way that I talk, damn near, right? So I love that you bring music into this as well, and this understanding that the music is poetry.
I saw just recently a reference to Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. I guess it's around the 3rd anniversary or 2nd, whatever it is, of him winning that, and what a big fuss was made over it. A lot of it negative, because people are thinking, he's a songwriter. Why is he getting the Nobel Prize for Literature? And then the question was, well, did the Academy change their standards? Is this some sort of pitch because he's getting old? What is it? But that's really what it is that the Academy, for whatever reason, accepted that songwriting, especially songwriting at a level that Bob Dylan does, is part of our literary culture. It just is. I mean, if you walk out today and ask, say a 12-year-old, 13, 14, 15-year-old kid to quote a lyric, they can, just like that. If you ask them to quote a poem, maybe, but probably not. But if you equate those two things, lyrics, poetry, and show it to them, it makes sense to them. I mean, you can look at Bob Dylan's lyrics as poems, and they're usually just as strong as they are as songs. Some, music makes good songs out of kind of mediocre poetry sometimes. Well, but you can take, like, to me, the sort of big three, I don't know if they're the big three, but the 3 songwriters that I listen to, well, there's probably 4, maybe 5 if I include Patti Smith, because she's in there too. But Bob Dylan, Tom Waits, Leonard Cohen, and Lucinda Williams are people who really listen to their lyrics. The music is great, bonus. But when I listen to the song, I'm not so wowed, except maybe by Tom Waits, who's a musical, genius and deviant. But when I listen to those, what I'm hearing is the power of the words. The music helps, nice, great. I don't mean to demean the music by any stretch, but it's a good marriage of the music and the lyrics, and not just trite lyrics, that are supported by an incredible piece of music. A lot of really driving hard rock and funk music is great, and then you read the lyrics and it's like, oh, get down, baby, get down, party tonight. Okay, work on that. But I think that there is more similarity than difference in, good songwriting and poetry. And it is a way to reach other people, younger people who may think, I don't want to have anything to do with that poetry stuff. It's too advanced. It's too complex. I don't understand it. not really that much to understand. And if you study it and work at it and write for a long time, most importantly, then it's not a mystery anymore. It really is. Yeah.
So just to talk process while I got the two of you here, you know, I've picked a lot of people's brains about their writing processes. You know, Tongo out in San Francisco, he gets up, writes every morning for 3 hours, regardless of whether you want to write, whether you don't want to write, whatever, like you write. Cloudy was talking about pulling pieces and lines as they came and kind of collecting those. I've been doing a lot of that recently. I'm finding that as my mental health comes back from the last couple of years, that I'm getting lines versus sitting down and writing whole poems at a time. I'm getting hit with these lines. So what is your personal process? Do you just meditate until the angels sing into your ears and give you the words? Do you bang your head against sharp objects? Is it somewhere in between those two processes?
Wow. Well, until recently, I have a yurt that I like to write in. It's on the back of our property, and it used to be woods behind that, but it's been developed now, so there's a big fancy house back there. But I'm unable to sit for long periods of time because of my cancer. So I try to find a comfortable position to sit in or lay in, and quite often my writing will start in longhand on a piece of paper, or with my laptop. I've been writing recently a cancer memoir that it's been very, very hard to write, and I decided to start integrating poetry into the prose. It's succeeding in a wonderful way. And in that situation, I always have carried a notebook, which I call the lost and found, which is where if something occurs to me or I see something, in the street corner, I write it down. But sometimes it's just there with me and I don't realize it. I am an early riser. I get up very early in the morning, sometimes 4:30. When I was finishing up on my cancer memoir, I wrote sometimes 4 hours a day, and it was painful. I can't remember feeling, oh, that was fun. And I mean, for one thing, it's a cancer memoir, but for another thing, it's just hard for me to sit. So I don't go out to the yurt as much as I did, which was like heaven out there. I mean, it's a beautiful big round room with lots of light and tucked into these trees. Patrick, you've seen it. It's pretty wonderful.
It's beautiful. Yeah, great.
Wonderful place. And but I've decided that everybody has to make their own wonderful space to capture those pieces of starlight you're describing, Andrew, because that's what it is. And sometimes, I don't know, when I was commuting, I'd sit on a bus and write until I was past my bus stop. It's like, oops, swept away again. I think for me, it comes when it comes and how it comes. Yeah. A lot of things I thought I needed. I thought I needed a big fancy desk to write. No, not true. I can write on my lap. I think it's much more being the receptacle for that, for me.
Yeah.
But I can write for up to 4 hours. I'm, limping at the end of that 4 hours. I can barely move, but I can do it that long. Sometimes I can only write for a few minutes, but if I'm writing, I'm writing. And that's the exciting part. When I found out how sick I was, I thought, oh no, I'm going to lose my writing mojo, but that hasn't happened. Thank God, because it's kept me rolling, and it keeps other people rolling too when I talk to them about it or work with younger writers, especially.
Absolutely. So, yeah. What about you, Patrick? You got any magic for us over here?
Well, I am a very undisciplined writer. If I get an idea that I want to that I want to roll with and I have time in that moment, I can spend a very long time on that thing and just follow where it goes until I reach the end of that particular moment with it. And then come back and work on it. I have lots of scraps of things. Like, you know, you were saying with Cloudy, I have little, I mean, some of it's like just Post-it notes that are stuck around with a line, you know, that says, tiny bones shudder into dust. And then eventually I'll use that, tiny bones shudder into dust. I saw one yesterday that just said burning dog bones. I have no idea where that came from, what it means, but I'll use that at some point. But I never set out to sit down and write unless I have something in progress that I'm working on. A project, yes, I do get focused and disciplined about that. But as a rule, my writing mechanisms are unruly and wild, and I don't really know what they are. I keep a list of ideas. I have very organized about it for the most part. My folders are meticulous. My desktop is meticulous, you know, with that sort of stuff, because I have a lot of ideas and I don't really like to lose them. Most of them I probably won't do anything with. And the same is true for songwriting for me. It's a similar process. I'll get an idea on what to do with it. The scraps thing actually worked its way into a song. And this was a previous band called Junkyard Burlesque. And, you know, I wrote most of the songs for that group as well. And it's kind of, things were kind of dry. We wanted something new. And you know, one of my partners said, you have anything? You got anything new? And I said, oh, I'm kind of down to the scraps. And in that moment, the song was born. That became like the chorus, the beginning of the chorus for that song was Down to the Scraps. And it literally was me going through this folder full of ideas and going, that's interesting. That's interesting. Oh, that's good. And just pulling out bits and pieces that were not connected from verse to verse in any way.
I love it.
And it worked. It worked, just knitting it together. It's almost like throwing it up in the air and splicing it together. But and that wouldn't have happened if that little accidental, you know, spark didn't occur. I'm down to the scraps, man. You know.
Well, and if you hadn't been open to it as well.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I'm a big believer in the theory of alignment over hustle. Right. Like, my philosophy, like, I can sit around and bang my head against the wall and try and write, and I can make myself get up at 6 a.m. and write until 9 a.m. every day, and I'll write something.
Yeah.
But if I take the time to meditate, to drink some juice, to get myself in a good space, then when I put my pen to that paper, it's just going to flow. The ink will just go. There won't be any head banging about it. And I think a lot of times, we, just as writers of all genre, can do ourselves a real disservice by like sitting down to bang our heads against the keyboard when it's like, hey man, maybe you need to eat something. Maybe you need to like drink some water or go get some sunshine.
Right.
And I think a lot of, you know, for me, like the capturing those little lines as they come was so crucial. And I hear you saying that too. Like, young poets, keep a note in your phone that's just called poem lines or something that you're able to like always capture those.
The record feature and text feature on the phone has probably salvaged more thoughts that would have just been gone if I didn't have that technology. You know, it really works. You're driving around, it's hard to write something down, but you can hit record on your phone and you got it. You know, and then you keep adding to it.
And make sure you save it to the cloud, y'all. Don't play yourself and record something on your phone, then crack your phone screen and you lose everything. I'll tell you an awful story about that some other time. So we're coming up on an hour here. As we leave, I just want to ask both of you as veterans and just people who I look up to and respect in the community, if you could give one message to Sacramento poetry as a whole, all of the poets, all of the writers, whatever levels they're at, on Poetry Day, your message to the poets of Sacramento, what would it be?
for me, it would simply be listen to each other. There's a lot of different, spokes in the cog, and just listen to each other, get together, talk it through, hang out, but just embrace everyone's diversity and contribution. That's
Love it.
It comes down to one word for me, and that is love. And it doesn't have to be romance, but it has to be love. And if you don't love yourself as a writer, you poor thing, get out of the business,
Yeah.
But really, if you have the urge to write, you're a writer, just love yourself.
And that right there, you can see the family resemblance in the two of us.
No doubt.
It definitely is love, and that's my whole message as laureate and in my laureateship is like us coming together, like Patrick said, and loving each other, like you said. So I'm right there with the two of you, right in line. I'm again really excited. This is just the first Sacramento Poetry Day that I know about, and I had a month or so out. So we're working to do what we can. But this next year, I'm very excited to work with the schools and the rest of the city to really bring poetry into everybody's homes and really make it something tangible that people are putting their hands on.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's wonderful. I wish you the best.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all of your enthusiasm about it, Drew. And, I think aside from the fact that you saw the message where I was bugging the Poetry Center about doing something, you're jumping in and being so excited about it, I think really drove it to happen in a bigger way than simply saying, oh, it's a Poetry Day, get out of here, whatever. Yeah. Good. It's good that you're excited about it. And that's going to translate to a lot of younger people, fortunately, which is, something that I think some of the old established poetry organizations in the town, we all grew up together. We were all 20-something, 30-something when we started. And we're not anymore. And, so, so those are the people who will carry this forward. So it's good that, this is a torch that we can handle, that we can hand on to them. Here's Poetry Day. Do something with it. Go, take it.
Absolutely.
It's already happening.
Yeah, right.
So, I'm a big believer in giving people their flowers while they're here. And I just want to hand each of you a gigantic bouquet. You've been so welcoming and such good guidance for me in coming into this, into being the city's youngest laureate in history. Grandma came and found me almost immediately and was like, hey, what do you need? How can I support and how can I be there? And that meant everything to me. So I just want to thank both of y'all for joining me and for joining me on the path. You didn't have to, and this is the work of bringing our generations together through poetry is being done right now. And I just thank both of y'all for being a part of it.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Love you both.
Take care.
Yeah.